Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. There's something up with 2025, in terms of, I don't know how many other people are feeling. I've talked about it a little bit before, but it's like just different. It feels just different. And I had a couple of comments that I wanted to get to here that, play into this whole thing. There's a few comments I'm going to read, and I think these are, a little different topics than usual, a little different comments than usual, but I want to get to some of those things. I also want to talk about the movie or TV show Queen's Gambit, which was just an atrocity. I didn't know how bad it was, and it was an Emmy-winning show and just horrible in terms of the agenda and these things. But let's start with the 2025 thing, and then I'll do the comments that'll feed into that. I've just been feeling. I've had some physical issues, which I want to get to as well, but that's a part of this. But it's like almost dreamlike at times. Things just feel different. Like there's something changed. There's something that the world the way it used to be is somehow. And I'm not talking about political events, things of that nature. Those things obviously there's stuff going on. Like I cover it every day, but I'm talking about kind of root causes. Like if there's a paradigm shift, everything changes. Like when you wake up, your first day of being married, or your first day being a mom or a dad, being a parent or something like that, or your first day after your parents die or something. Like the world isn't the same, right? Like there's something that used to be there that isn't there, or something that wasn't there before is now there. Some role you're playing, some shift in your, you get some kind of, life changing job or something, or you lose some job, or you have some physical injury, or something happens, like something happens in your personal paradigm, in your life that is shifts, and these are physical, material things, right? That that happen and they shift. Your life is never going to be the same after they happen. Just in terms of the things I've been talking about. I put up a podcast, some of my videos, and I did like an exclusive introduction to the podcast that's on Spotify, and it's I don't even know if you can find it and whatever, but there's a singular voiceover where I talk about how the apocalypse has happened in terms of when you have technology like the cell phone and the telephone before that, and cable TV and the automobile, and things like this, the airplane, that once these things come into play, the old world disappears. The world before airplanes, the world before AI, the world before a cell phone, the world before the internet. There's been these technological type of things that have happened. You can go back to like the world before Jesus, or the world before Krishna, or these other things. Like, and those are things that had happened so long ago. People aren't there's not really a sense of these spiritual events that happen and material events that happen. The invention of the wheel, right? The world before the wheel, and that world disappears. Now the world has a wheel in it. Right now the world has the ability to manipulate fire. These things. Human beings before and after the crossbow. And so I get into that quite a bit. That we've had apocalypses already because, worlds have ended, and you have this, your own personal stuff, like the world before you were, like I said, married or had a, child, or, these number of things that you have these, events in your life where your world shifts and everything has to change. And the spiritual aspect of that is something that is harder to see when there's been a shift, and then the material events fall in line to bring about that spiritual reality. And things can't get worse spiritually. I guess they could, but we're kind of close to rock bottom, and so there has to be something that changes it for the better at this point, or we're close to that point where it can't get any worse in terms of the lack of connection to our spiritual side. And so, like there's been things, we've had more lightning bugs. I've seen more lightning bugs this year than any other year because of the massive amount of rain. And rain is, significant in the Sizemore system as it represents divine grace. But we've had more summer rain than we've ever had before. And there was rain that just passed us by the other day that hit places around here, other places that weren't that far away from us. But we missed out on some of these rains, and it's epic rain, biblical type rains we've had. And then there's been a lot more animals. There's all these baby bunnies. It's just like a whole level of stuff that's going on at the homestead where it's a totally like unique year in various ways. We have these mulberry trees, and they were, my wife and I just stopped, at the mulberry trees when we go on a hike, and we're walking around, and we would just, like eat hundreds of them, and they were, they lasted forever. They were it was like a bumper crop this year. Everything was different, like in terms of, the rain was something, but it just felt like some kind of, like this is like a weird, it's almost like I said, a dream. Like there's something that's changed. That's, our world isn't the same in some way. So let me go to the, I said breakfast. Let me go to some of these messages that I got, comments, and I think there's one funny one that I want to do first. It's not as. Does anyone else wonder if Paul gets his haircuts at home, or does he drive the farm truck into town twice a month? Cheers, brothers and sisters. I thought that was a funny comment. And why would anybody wonder about that? But it's weird, but whatever. I basically cut my own hair. My wife sometimes helps depending on just timing of the thing, right? Because I have these hair clippers, and my wife was cutting my hair for a while during COVID with the hair clippers, and I really just don't like going to the barber anymore. These beauty parlors, I brought my son one time, and there was a biological male dressed as a female in the place, and it's a sports place. It's like this sports cuts, and it's expensive, and it's different when you went to like an old fashioned barber, but it's just like, and that's just that one thing was just, I'm like, why is this place that says sports cuts that's, more of a, has this, this was like 3 years ago, and that's just one issue, not getting the same person every time, these things, and like not even having a person that I want to go see every time. There's a guy who used to cut my hair in Vegas, and he was an old-fashioned barber, just one person, and he we used to talk about stuff, and it was like a thing, like going to the barber shop, but like that stuff doesn't really exist anymore. And then COVID happened, and you'd have to wear a mask the whole time, and it's like stupid because you have to, you can't wear a mask. It's stupid, the whole COVID thing. And so we got some clippers, and my wife started doing my hair, and then I started to do some of it ahead of time, like if she was, it was like a nice day out. Like if I go outside, then I don't have to clean up all the hair in the kitchen with the clippers. Anyways, I've spent a lot more time on this than I wanted. But it, shows you the kind of times we are. And I eventually realized, I use the 2-guard, and I give myself the, basically the whole thing, and then my wife helps with some of the stuff or whatever sometimes. So that's the answer to that question. And we have a farm truck, but I almost never drive it into town. I go shopping once in a while. I take the van. That's about my extent of my going out and seeing people. So then there was these 2 comments. The first one was, let me do this one here first. Now these were things where I was just in a weird mood, and I didn't ban the people at first, but then I thought about it. I'm like, these are both bannable offenses. So the guy says, "Hi, Ralph. I am pleasantly surprised by your Ralph Adamus call months ago when you called that Israel would make a play for land grab while America held whatever power they had left before the collapse." Now, my dad was named Ralph, so that's really an auto ban. It's a dick move to call me Ralph, like Ralph Romano. And, you'd have to watch a bunch of my videos to do that. It's just, not that I'm like, I feel like I didn't ban the person last night because, whatever. But I wanted to comment about this. And I thought about, You got to ban somebody for calling me Ralph because it's not a cool thing to do. Now we're hearing from correspondents acting like OFC, it would happen. Maybe the algorithm should have brought peeps here first to hear it. Okay, so that's. But then you ass wrong about Whisper of the Brighter World Prophecies, though. No way that whack shit gonna happen. It would be too uncanny. Um, there's when you talk about something like prophecies, is it something where the person is imagining something, making it up for personal gain, or is actually connected to higher souls? And the other thing is that even the medium who's great at doing this, the medium in the Sajmark system, more channeled messages than the history of than any other time in the history of planet Earth. This woman, it's like 20,000 messages. It's unheard of. And so, you think about the Bible has some of that in it. Like Jesus appeared to his disciples post death, and so there was these interactions, channeled stuff. St. Paul never met Jesus, but there was some, a different form of channeling, like the kind of stuff that I do here, where there's information flowing through people. But even her, she was warned that sometimes people or entities, not people, spiritual entities were trying to pretend to be Babaji or whatever it was. Like, it's you don't see somebody's face, so it's just about how you feel. And somebody, a different entity could come and try to connect with you. I mean, there's negative entities that maybe have an agenda, spiritual essences and things like this. Spiritual, a spirit without a body. And so you can channel something that somebody has, it's not somebody, some essence, some spiritual being is giving you false information. And you can feel like it's the same person. It's not an exact science, anything in the etheric world. And so, all that stuff. But, and the other thing is sometimes prophecies can be avoided. Like you're getting a warning, and then you have this time to change what you're doing. And with the Whispers of the Brighter World, none of those things would come into play. Either they're true or they're not. And if it's true, then these things are going to happen, right? Like it's a test of maybe the dates might be changed a little bit. I mean, there might be some, whatever it is. But when I have been looking at this 2025, 2026 date where something big was going to happen. Something bigger than 9/11, something bigger than COVID, like something really big. And it seems like the hints are there that it's a nuclear, war type situation or something like that. Some kind of event like that. And of course, there's also this idea of the pole shifting. So I listened to, I watched some, like Nova show, some of those I like those, used to watch those things all the time, animal shows or nature shows. And this was about the poles reversing themselves. This is like 20 years ago. And it said, that it should have happened already. It happens every 200,000 years, and it was like 240,000 years 20 years ago. So we're getting close to 300,000 years. So it's 100,000 years late. It happens, they have this way of measuring it in the Arctic ice to show, this glacial ice that just keeps on building, and it records time periods. And there's these things that they show that's happened. They have various ways, these ways of identifying stuff, and I'm sure it's not exact science, but that the poles have reversed themselves a couple of times, that they can see every 200,000 years. And the thing that they said would start happening is you'll start seeing the northern lights in like Florida. And everywhere else, like people start seeing northern lights because the magnetic pole is fluctuating, and that's what causes the northern lights. And so let me read this one. I don't want to read all these ones, but this is the one I'm going to read. Sunday, February 25th, 2001, 6 p.m. My dear daughter, we would like to now start giving you messages having a totally different content. Scientists are very often mistaken in their assertions. In a century, these assertions will be outdated. Man will have taken a step forward in his understanding of the laws governing the universe. They will become obvious to a great number of minds capable of understanding their real meaning. Significant changes will take place on the Earth globe after great upheavals have occurred. Even the best established structures will be disrupted, and the elements will make life difficult for human beings who will have to face up to things. Another race stronger and having much more developed sense of extrasensory perception will set up a world that would astonish most men living in the present. When the poles are reversed, they will generate great climactic changes. Men will need to adjust themselves. A large part of the population in its present proportions will have disappeared. The Earth will start a new era, best suited to its evolution. We will further elaborate on some of the mentioned topics, and you will have to note down without wondering too much, even though you cannot verify the soundness of what you are writing. Predictions should neither worry you nor embarrass you. They do not relate to your present day, and a long time will have passed before all assertions come true. You will need to trust in us and leave your usual doubts aside. These writings will long remain in oblivion before they could be made public. Therefore, if it suits your consideration as fiction, we have no objection to that. Don't worry, you are not under the influence of a devious spirit. We will assume the normal course of talks tomorrow. Be at peace. Be blessed, Babaji. So this was February 21st, 2001. The one that's comes after that shortly is the one about the nuclear power will ruin this world. And she freaked out. So this is a simple woman, a rich woman. She came from a rich family, a shut-in. And she probably never heard of the poles reversing themselves before, right? And he just kind of threw that in there. And that's a part of it. Like, that's one of the things, right? And, it's something that happens. And, what is that going to do? Because, one, it opens up the Earth to solar flares, which could wipe out the electrical grid. I mean, these things are talked about in various places. I've read this. There's a book called 100 Chernobyls or something by this guy, Matt Stein, who was an MIT guy, who said that, if the magnetic field came down because of an EMP, or there was an EMP or something like this, like just a bomb EMP, or there was a coronal mass ejection, a solar flare, it could wipe out the electrical grid, and then these nuclear power plants that need to be cooled won't have the ability to do that, and they'll just start going, China syndrome stuff. So, all these things, right? But, this is not for me to convince people or not. Like, I don't give a shit. I'm not trying to sell Whispers of the Brighter World to people. And I'll talk about this more with the second comment, because it's important. Like, I don't care. Like, this is a sense of duty, and I want to come back to that. And there's this guy, the Dodgy Truther, who, he just talked to me about, there's a French video out now about the Brighter Minds scam. And as of yesterday, it had 250,000 views. It's only been out a short period of time. There's a video I saw where these people from these Abhyasi Brighter Mind people that do the Heartfulness cult thing that, used to be, the Saj Marg meditation and Gratefulness meditation that I'm still doing, that is separate from that, debacle. I've continued on doing it in its purest form, and they've gone south. And they had French people pushing this Brighter Minds bullshit thing, French Abhyasis. And I'm not sure where I saw this, maybe about a year ago. I was like, oh, there's, in France, I wrote when I came into India, there was a guy who was, he was French, but he was teaching French in England. He was a school teacher. And he didn't like France at all. He liked living in England. And he said that, that there was a time, and I kind of heard about this, but I didn't have there's details that I didn't know. And France had this war on cults that they were listing all these different organizations as cults. And Saj Marg got on the list because there's a guy who was a real prick to his wife, like he was a bad husband. And, and his wife became a preceptor, and she ended up leaving him. And he blamed Saj Marg and saying, they're pushing for divorce. And in reality, Saj Marg is really about accepting your spouses for their limitations, all that kind of stuff, right? The only reason to get divorced is someone's blocking your spiritual progress in some way, that they're hampering your spiritual progress. There's no other reason to get divorced in the Saj Marg teaching. I mean, if you do, you do. That's on you. But, the only real legitimate reason is if somebody's blocking your spiritual progress. But anyway, this guy pitched a hissy fit, and he ran to the cult people in France. And he got Saj Marg put on the list, which caused the people there that did the practice lots of problems. And this guy tells me that, so what happened was Tom Cruise, Scientology got put on the cult list. And Tom Cruise, who's usually popular in France, talked to them, and they started to get, they started to tamp down, or they started to, relax on their cult bullshit stuff. And that maybe wasn't even bullshit, right? And aside from that, the French organization, the Sajmar branch of the, each country has its own specific group of people. And the French were always problems. I mean, there's some good ones there. There's a guy that I saw in India quite a bit. And he was great, real saintly person. But the guy who ran it was a real prick. I've talked about this in some of my, I don't want to get into all these stories, but there was, some things that came from the French that were just, they were not great. Like, and they had trouble accepting the discipline, the spiritual discipline aspect of it, the, having a spiritual master in these things. It's like European countries, often do. So I was pretty surprised when there wasn't more pushback from these European countries and this Brighter Minds bullshit thing. Because it's just fucking ridiculous. And it's already been proved as a hoax and a fraud. It's just, there's all this evidence about it. Where you can smell the colors of it. You can solve a Rubik's Cube by touching it, tapping on it, and smelling it. And somehow the kid can get a visual image of all the colors. I mean, what they do is they take a ball out of a bag, and the kid taps it, they smell it, they roll around, and they're through these other senses, through this process where the midbrain activation, balancing the left-right hemisphere, these silly little exercises that have been around forever, that they can somehow use their other senses to get visual images, which just doesn't happen. But it'd be one thing if it's a solid color, but Rubik's Cubes, the colors are scrambled. And they're not touching every color. They're not smelling. It's silly, right? It's just fucking stupid. They're peeking through the blindfold. Right? They're cheating. It's a fucking, it's been proven. There's a doctor who reached out to me who did some of the, somebody who was asked by Dodgy to test some kids, and every kid he put through the test with eye patches instead of a blindfold failed, and all the people turned on him, and he called me, and he was, saying, what am I in a cult? Like, it's so fucked up, right? He was freaked out by it, right? So it's a scam. And, I'm surprised the European people submitted to it. Because you see the audience, it's like a lot of them know, like, it's silly, it's fucking stupid, right? But anyways, I was surprised about all this. And then this French video came out, and this guy, this Dodgy Truther, somebody who dislikes Dodgy and knows that these scams are going on. And I haven't corresponded. He hasn't written me. He always sends me stuff, but he said he's just not paying attention to the stuff either. But we interacted over something. I saw something, and I sent it to him, and then he's been sending me a bunch of stuff. But then he sent me a long, kind of almost a list of hopeful things that might happen with this French video going viral, and somehow the UN would get into it, and Dodgy would be held accountable. His son has been indicted for $170 million of investor fraud, taking monies based in fraudulent, cooking the books for this, pharmacy scam that they did. And he's hopeful, and I'm like, I'm going to write back to him at some point and say, nobody gives a shit, right? Like, Dodgy isn't going to be held accountable because, everyone's corruption and just shittiness is running rampant worldwide. I mean, it's corruption's a big part in India. There's no accountability for that. There's no system in place like everything. I mean, see what everything's happening in the world right now. And there's no accountability, right? Because this is the shift that's happened. And so, all of these things indicate a need for a change, right? When corruption can run rampant without any system in place and there's no ethics and morals left, what do you think happens then? Like, what do you think that'll lead to? When people can just, like, do what Trump's doing and just force their way on, there's no checks and balances in the American government and all this stuff, and Israel can do what they're doing, and, all the shit that can happen. China can do what they're doing, and there's, the full COVID thing, the whole, getting away with these things and people just accepting it. Thank you, sir, may I have another bullshit kind of stuff. And there's no accountability in the system. And corruption and sociopathic behavior is being rewarded. What do you think will happen to the fucking system? I mean, there has to be a divine response. But it just feels fucking different, right? Like, it's like this year, it's, And you look around, and it makes total sense that there has to be some kind of big thing to fucking stop what's going on, right? Like we're going over the fucking cliff, like I said in my last video, and or 2 videos ago. And what's going to happen? Something's going to happen to stop that because, I mean, we're going to go over the cliff, but some people, whatever it might be, but then something, the cliff that has to happen. There has to be like, oh my God, we fucked up, right? There has to be, a moment of realization that we're fucked. So going back to this person's comment here, that's the Whispers of the Brighter World thing. I clicked on the wrong thing. Going back to this person's comment, UOS is wrong about the Whisper of the Brighter World prophecies, though. No way, whack shit going to happen. It would be uncanny. It would be too uncanny. And so, what do you mean it'd be too uncanny? Like the thing about truther stuff is, when people think, well, they won't do that. Nobody's that evil. Some of the things that are out there. And, if you see the evil shit that people have done, governments have done horrible things. Horrible things. Genocide, not just killing people, but torturing them, experimenting on people, mind control. I mean, all the things that they've done. What people will do to each other, what they'll do to their loved ones, what they'll do to their children, what they'll do to their spouses, what they'll do to their parents, and, just what people are, capable of doing, like horrible things. Every day people are fucking doing horrible things to people that they so-called love or whatever. Screwing them over, manipulative things, twisted things, envious things, jealous things, fucking, evil shit. There's just a lot of fucking evil, dark shit that people will do. People can also become saints, but that's not really in the forefront now. And so anything that people are accused of, there's a possibility they'll do it. I mean, look at horror movies, these fucking things that people produce and then people go see. Why the fuck would you want to watch that shit, right? People doing horrible things to, the fear and the all of it. It's just dark shit. It's horrible stuff. Nightmarish things, monstrous things, right? And so, of course, they're believable. Like, what would be not believable? Well, that would be, too uncanny. What the fuck are you talking about? Like this, look at what's happening. Like, is it not believable that we could be in World War III in 6 months? That there could be a nuclear event or something in 6 months, 7 months? I mean, and I knew when the Whispers of Brighter World came out, when we got closer to it, it wouldn't just come out of the blue. You'd have fair warning that something like this might happen. And that's what I provide here. But I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. I don't give a shit what you believe. And, and I certainly don't want to convey this sense of like a doomsday, everyone stop living their lives, and run out into the woods, because that's what not Saj Mark isn't about that, right? Like this information has to be utilized in a mature way, if these things are going to happen, because there's always an if until it happens. Whatever's going on right now seems to be building to it, right? But that, you can prepare for it, but not go batshit crazy and run off to the, like I said, run off to the woods and all these things. You can't be paranoid and use them as some kind of way to avoid your responsibilities in your life or whatever. You still have to, the system is still going. We have to participate in the system. And, we can prepare for, pockets of the future for something in a post-systemic collapse situation. But we can't go all in on that yet. It'd be silly. I mean, I don't know. Each person has to decide for themselves. But, like, if you get information, what do you do with it? And maturity has to be there, a sense of, practicality. And so we don't know how long. It doesn't mean that the system is going to collapse in 1 year. We don't know what it's going to be, right? It's amazing the resilience that's in the human race and the, planet itself and what it can endure. And so anyways, but I'm not, and the other thing is the person said, I'm impressed by your prediction, but it's not prediction. I'm just reading what Israel is as a country, what they do. And and the person saying this, let me go back to the comment, right? Hi, Ralph. I was pleasantly surprised by your Ralph Damas call months ago when you called that Israel would make a play for the land grab while America held whatever power that it had before the collapse. Well, part of that perception is I understand the Whispers of the Brighter World messages, and I understand, the reality of systemic collapse. In America, it looks like it's going to be fucking done, right? And so if that's the case, what are the global implications? What are the implications of Israel if America shits the bed? and they have all these. They've pissed everybody off around them, and they no longer have America supplying them weapons and having their back as a a big brother bully. They've bullied all these other kids, and then their big brother dies or gets something happens to their big brother, and then they're left alone in a school full of kids that are all pissed off that this piece of shit had bullied them. And so Israel had no choice. So it wasn't me predicting something, but some of that had to do with knowing the whispers of the brighter world and knowing about the end of things, the system as we now know it. In America, what has happened in America, just watching it, right? Like, this is just me being rational and practical about what if I was Israel and I saw my situation, I saw what's happening in America. I knew I was on the clock to grab as much power and land and things and disrupt and denut as much of those eminent enemies as I could, like Iran and these other countries. Because if America was not there to protect it, like, think about all the, you're talking about 2 million people against, what is it, 93 million people in Iran? 63, 93, something like that? 93, I think. And so, like, what are you going to do? The armies and all these countries, like, they had no chance. They can't survive. So the person says, okay, I'm impressed that you could predict that, but you're wrong about whispers? Okay. Like, that's silly. You're just telling me I'm good at doing this. And so, like, and I don't give a shit. Like, I'm not, great, don't believe in it. Like, it's not my problem. And so let's move to the next comment, because that's also like this in a different way. So this person, hi, Paul, I appreciate years of work and thought you put into what you share. I just want to share a bit of my personal experience. It's because of such a positive change for me. It's been such a positive change for me. Meditation ended up pulling me into the darkness I didn't expect. The thing that rescued me wasn't religion, it was Jesus. Not what people said about him or what religion made of him, but he said about himself. I know you've spoken about the Bible as a whole, but there's something different about the Gospels, especially the words and story of Jesus. Would you ever consider reading at least one of them for yourself? Maybe the Gospel of John. You're spiritually sensitive, intuitive. There's something in his words that carries the energy unlike anything else I've experienced. No pressure at all, just an invitation from one true seeker to another. Thanks for hearing me out. The person donated money, which I found, and again, both these people, I didn't ban at first. I banned them this morning after thinking about it, right? And the reason that I banned this person is because, well, there's actually several reasons. The part of them giving money, donating, like this is there's multiple violations of the rules I have about what's appropriate in terms of your comments to me, the boundaries that I have. And the person violated a bunch of them, right? But in a very nice way, saying it in a nice way, like it's a concern troll type thing. But the first piece to it is, the person's saying, meditation ended up pulling me into darkness. And so, they're basically saying that what I'm doing is the same thing. That meditation is pulling me into darkness the way that it happened to them. That everybody who meditates, this is what happens to them. And I know there are Christians who get into New Age stuff, leave Christianity, meditate, and then they run up against something and they run back to Christianity. And they feel like whatever they were doing, yoga or something like this, is evil. And there's a couple of things about that. But that isn't my experience at all, right? It has nothing to do with me, because it has nothing to do with what I do either, right? Saj Marg meditation isn't what this person was doing. And if it was, they're not having the same experience that I'm having. Like, there's people who have bad experiences with it, and that's because of them, not because of the system. And so let me address the first piece there, then we'll get back to the meditation piece. So I talk about this all the time, but I am not hard selling it. I'm not pressuring people, and I don't care if people do it or not. I would like people to do it, but I don't care if they do it or not, because it's something they have to choose to do. Like, I don't recommend things. I talk about this all the time. I don't want to influence people, and I'm not pushing or being forceful about it and saying, you guys got to do this, what's wrong with you, any of these things. Because, just being around Saj Marg and my first experience with it, when I first had these amazing experiences with the meditation, I couldn't wait to tell everybody about it. And I thought everyone would want to do it just based on what I was saying. And like anybody who knew me and knew I was so unenthusiastic about pretty much everything, and that I found this thing, that was amazing, what I'd be excited about, you would think that would be, just, based on the person I was, they'd be like, wow, that's kind of not like Paul at all, right? And, they could think I lost it, which is always a possibility, for people to think. Or they could wonder why, someone who really wasn't into anything like this, wasn't excited or enthusiastic about anything, all of a sudden was. My brother thought I joined a cult. That's his story. He's a bullshitter. And he tried it, and then he didn't feel anything, but he stuck with it, and he wasn't sensitive to it, and now it's his thing. But there were times where he was so negative about it. He'd call and complain about the whole thing. He loved the books. He liked the philosophy. He got the book part. And he always read those type of books. He had read various type of philosophical books and things. And he was into the teachings, but he couldn't feel the transmission, and he was bummed. And he complained about it to me, like he would dump this shit on me all the time. And then he would act away when we went to gatherings. He'd act in a way that kind of embarrassed me, right? It was just, he's a character, right? Like me, but with way more, restlessness and ADHD and just, more outgoing and just, all the kind of negatives I have, even more on steroids, right? More forceful. And, so it wasn't great for me that he was doing it. And it just, a lot of times, and over the years when he became the caretaker of the ashram and people thought he was the one who told me about it, they're like I was Peter's brother. Oh, you're Peter's brother, like this kind of thing. It wasn't a jealousy thing, but I was enduring all this shit from him, his negativity towards the system. He would just call up me and complain, or we'd talk about it. He didn't feel anything, and then he would, it would keep on going through with it, and it was draining me. It was a negative. It wasn't helping me. It wasn't a benefit. I wanted him to do it, and I was hoping, my brother was sort of almost like a second father to me for a little bit. He was, 17 years older than me. I lived with him and his kids, his wife and his kids for a little bit. And, he had an influence on me, which I feel was somewhat positive, though he was, my mom said he was jealous of me in different ways and whatever it was. So, it was a mixed thing, like with any sibling kind of relationship, but it was mostly a negative for me. But I wasn't willing to endure it because I wanted what's best for him. And, I was happy that someone in my family was doing the thing. It was mixed, but like anything else, it's mixed. And, I've learned over the years that it either happens for somebody or it doesn't. People just don't, sometimes people can feel the transmission and benefit from the system and then, walk away after 20 years. It's a weird thing for whatever reason. And so I don't hard sell it or get forceful about it because, I don't want people doing it for me. My family, my people, my kids, my family, all these things. If they choose not to do it, I don't pressure them. There's a Master Charji had 3 brothers. And one day he said, you come meet Babaji. And he was like, to his brother, and he kind of insisted he do it. In a way where you want him to, come meet him and, whatever, and let it, whatever happen. Right. And that's all you can do. And, he was more insistent about it. His brother finally did it. And he said to, Babaji, he said, I know that it works for one person. I know one person who's changed, but I know a lot of people who do this and it hasn't changed them. Charji's dad did it and other people. And his Babaji said, who's the person that changed? He goes, well, my brother, who became the 3rd master system. And Babaji said, isn't it enough that the system changed one person? You know how hard it is to change people? Isn't it enough that there's one success story? What, you want it to change the world, everyone else but you, and then you'll do it? How many people do you need, right? It, works and changes people. It's changed me. It didn't change my brother, for example, and other people for the better. People have been changed for the better by the system. Like, isn't that enough that, it helps people be more loving? Like, what else does that? What is out there that helps people be more loving, right? And so, either people do it or they don't, and you can't force them. And, then you're on the hook for it, in terms of like they blame you for it if you're like insistent and you're, and there's no force, no coercion. There's none of those things. And any of the stuff I do here, I just give information because it's my duty to do that. It's dharma, this the idea of I have information that could help people, and so I give it to people, and it's like it's like I'm Pontius Pilating the thing and washing my hands of it, right? Like I've done my part. I've told you, whatever it is, I give the information here, not just about Sajmark, but any of it, because I have it to give, and it's benefited me, and so I feel like I'm obligated to tell other people, and what they do with it and whether it works for them or not is out of my hands, and I and I don't worry about any of that shit, right? And so I don't do what this person did, like this person saying that they meditated and it caused darkness, right? They, whatever it is, let me go back to the comment here. Meditation ended up pulling me into darkness. The thing that rescued me wasn't religion, it wasn't Jesus, not about people said about him or what religion made of him, but what he said about himself. And here's the second piece, right? Jesus shouldn't talk about himself. Like, you don't talk about yourself. This is who I am that I am. Like, there was some insecurity on Jesus's part. Now, he did reach, a higher level of spirituality, which is a hard thing to do. And he was sharing it with people. He wanted them to do what he did. Now, there's evidence, and I'm sure that he went to India. And he was doing a form of yoga. The other thing is Jesus meditated. There's one way to connect to God, and that's through meditation. It's a process. Everybody meditates. It's just what you meditate on. Meditation is something your brain does. You have these different states. You have the alpha waves, the beta waves, right? Your brain goes and does different types of things. There's sleep. There's 4 different kinds of sleep or whatever, or maybe even more. There's the subconscious workings of your brain. And one of the things that you do is meditate. So meditate reveals whatever's there. And it's what you meditate on, the object of your meditation, the method of the meditation, and then having some consciousness, like a guru or somebody, a teacher, that's there who can help guide you through the meditative process, because you're going into your internal world and there's going to be some shit in there, some darkness, some negativity inside of you that you're going to come across. And there's potential pitfalls of spiritual, like a kundalini opening and causing you great distress. This has happened to plenty of people, right? Where the kundalini gets open and some guru who's not a real guru or not, responsible, doesn't have the ability to manage that situation, right? Something like that. There's other things that could happen. That's just one example. And so the system that you use, the people that are there, the beings that are there to guide you through it, and what you have inside when you start meditating and what you discover inside yourself is all, some scars that come out and, things that blossom. And usually, if people are in a shitty system that's, like not necessarily a scam. Okay, so it was at this point, it was around 10 o'clock in the morning when I smelled smoke. And I thought to myself, this is another little thing that's happened recently. So there's been a couple of times that I have left things on the stove and forgot about them, which never used to happen. Maybe something similar to that, but I've had a few kind of forgetful things. And I make this drink for my wife and I, which is turmeric, ginger, pepper, cinnamon, and lime. It's good for the digestion. We drink it in the morning. And so I realized I'm going to have to start setting alarms. I've always been able to keep things in my, what I'm doing. I've been able to keep them in my, my mind, all of them, and not forget. Like, I don't have to set an alarm clock. I can just mentally, this has been since I was a kid. I discovered I could do this. I could just mentally say, wake up at 7 o'clock, and I wake up at 7 o'clock. And so in the morning or whatever it is, right? So, but other than that, when I'm conscious, I've been able to keep everything in my head and just not forget about things like that. And I've had a few kind of things, leaving the freezer open, or maybe not making sure if I close it or not, and things that I've made sure that I work on, and I'm not an OCD person, so I have to make myself be one and double check things and whatever it is. And I burned a pot, not horribly bad, maybe about 2 weeks ago. And then, like a couple days later, I heated up some pasta, and I left the burner on low, but still it was on. And my son luckily came down and he said it was on. And I turned it off, so that was a bummer. And so I smelled smoke, and I'm like, I don't think I was cooking anything. And I went out, and the whole house was full of smoke, and like almost like a fire, much worse than anything I'd seen before. And I went in, and my wife had put on, she makes this sugar water for the hummingbirds, and you have to make it into like a syrup, cook it down a little bit. And she had been really upset. There's a family drama stuff going on with her mom's funeral, and her family, and just just sucky stuff from sucky, whatever people. And she was kind of upset about that, and she had to go out, so it was like a whole thing, and there wasn't much time for us to talk about some stuff that needed to be talked about, just logistical things and other stuff, and I want to do a parasite cleanse, and there's this other stuff that came up about some Tesla machine. She had heard somebody talking about nanobots being found in somebody's system, and and like these things we're talking. And I've been having this, health issues. I've had a tooth issue now, a dental issue, which hopefully isn't as one of my teeth was like, I could feel my pulse in my tooth, and I searched it. That's not good. And I've had some issues with my heart, some fluttering and, skipping a beat, and that's kind of disappeared. I don't think I've had it for about 6 months, but I've had it again lately. And so, it was like a chaotic time. And then, I came out of the house, it's full of smoke. And I'm like, holy shit, this is bad. And it was so bad, like I was coughing, and like it was, when I went outside, I could smell it on my clothes, like it was, everywhere. And, I dealt with what I could deal with at the moment. Got all the windows open, brought the dogs outside, all that kind of stuff, so they wouldn't breathe it in. Then the smoke alarm went off, so I just, I said, all right, let's just go, let's bring the dogs and go shopping, but it's hot outside, and I had to, mind them being in the car for too long. It was just a fucking disaster. Like, it fucked up my whole day. But I'm saying this because my wife and I have both experienced being somewhat forgetful, or just, whatever, having some sort of lapses a little bit, and I don't attribute it to cognitive issues or any of these things. Like, I've had stuff forgetting about something like that, but I'm usually fairly conscientious about it, and I'll usually remember, like, wait, did you check the stove? And I'll go back out and see that I left it on, something like that, right? But it's been happening like more frequently. So anyways, like, there's all that. But let me get into back what I was saying. So, and again, hopefully I don't repeat anything here, but I'm not, this is not what I usually do when I do a voiceover like this. And so, I think I was talking about right before, the whole thing happened with the smoke, was that, you have a method and a system, and then you have an object of meditation. You have people overseeing your meditation, and then you have stuff inside of you. And whatever's inside of you, you're going to see, stuff that you weren't able to see before, because you have defense mechanisms, you have your personality, whatever it is that forms around and not, that dismisses things or rationalizes things. And you see the truth about yourself, some of the negative things and some of the positive things, and both of them scare the shit out of you. I mean, they can because, like I've talked about this in so many videos. And so when people say they do some sort of spiritual practice and they uncover darkness and they run back to Christianity, it's because Christianity isn't dynamic. It's not a spiritual practice, it's a religion, right? So for this person to say, let me reread the comment now because I've been away for it in a second. And again, like I'm donating money and then doing something that violates the boundaries and shit. It's just not, like I'm not going to ban you for $40. Like, like, I mean, it's just whatever it is, $20 here, whatever the thing is. It's like, it's anything that seems manipulative, which of course that's going to seem that way when a person knows enough about what I do here to know that this wasn't a cool thing to do. I I appreciate years of work and thought that you into what you share. The thought you put into what you share. I just want to share a bit of personal experience because it has such a positive change on me. Now, if the person came in and said, I meditated and ended up pulling into darkness I didn't expect. The thing that rescued me was religion. It wasn't religion. It was Jesus, not what people said about him, what religion made him, but what he said about himself. And then if he left it at that, that wouldn't. They can't. That would, I mean, it has nothing to do with me. Fine, Bible's working for you. Like, great. I'm not. I'm not saying the Bible's all bad and Christianity's all bad, and you can't be a good person or have some kind of. I mean, there's been many saints that have come out of this Christian religion. As to me, it's not. There's no method there for spirituality, so that's it's limited. But if it's working for you, great. Like I'm not. I don't care. I'm not. I mean, I'm happy for anybody who's experiencing legitimate success and moving forward spiritually, whatever it is, even if the system isn't as good as the system that I do. Like if I think the system that I do is better, that doesn't mean that I hope that whatever you're doing is working for you. At least you're doing something, right? That's positive. But this is the part that gets shitty about it. I know you've spoken about the Bible as a whole, but there's something different about the Gospels, especially the words of the story of Jesus. Would you ever consider reading at least one of them for yourself, maybe the Gospel of John? And so, maybe the person hasn't heard me talk about specifically the Gospel of John, because he said what Jesus said about himself. Jesus saying those things, and I'd like to give Jesus the benefit of the doubt, because we know the Bible's been heavily edited. And so let's say Jesus didn't even say those things. But if he did say those things, you can't say that about yourself. You can't say I'm the only son of God. First of all, we're all children of God, so that can't ever happen. Nobody can ever say that ever because it's not true. Everything that's created is created by God and we're, from God. We're of God, right? We're not, there's nothing in the universe that doesn't have God as its base, as the material to make you into whatever you are, right? Your soul is divine, comes from a divine essence, and your body is made up of divinity, divine elements. And so, we have freedom of choice, and we have our ability to manifest our own, our own thoughts and things like that, right? So the shit that he says, and especially the John 3:16 stuff, and I read all of John 3 from the beginning to the end of that whole section, and it's full of shit, right? And my mom saw through it. My mom was a devout Catholic. She we were in Ottawa, and she's looking at these Native American people, and she says, these are beautiful people. I can't believe that they'd be going to hell. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Of course they're not going to hell. They were doing some kind of, Native American performance, and, my mom saw them as spiritual people with their own spiritual beliefs. And I didn't understand then what is this John 3:16 bullshit. And it's the worst thing in the Bible because it makes you believe that there's no other path to heaven, which is, religious manipulation. And Jesus is, if he said these things, he's bragging. And, there's a few things he says. I am that I am. That's a brag. There's a few things like this. I can't remember all of them, but they're just subpar. As a spiritual person, you can't say that. Like the best thing, the most you could ever be is a conduit for God. If people come to you and they see you as some divine being, it's not your ego and it's not your physical body and it's not you as a person, all of which can be divinized. It's your ability to get out of the way and let divinity flow through you so other people can benefit from it. And being humble and being, moderate and being selfless and these things. And it's never about, look at me. And some of the things he did, the miracles were showing off. Jesus had some insecurities, whatever was going on with him. And again, I don't know how much of this story is accurate because, again, they manipulated the whole thing. But, Jesus had some issues with needing to show himself. And he needed to do social work, which is another part, which is, Christianity Jesus's work was half spiritual and half social, half political, half social political, right? And so, he was about social change. And there's people like that. Gandhi, he's similar to Gandhi in that way. Gandhi was, political, social, and he had some spiritual stuff. but wasn't, he wasn't providing a spiritual path. He was looking to change a society in a political, social way, right? And there's a lot of people like that. Social reforming is not spiritual. The spiritual people just work on the spiritual level, and they don't do anything in terms of changing governments. It's stupid to do that because none of that stuff works. Spirituality helps to divinize people, and if you divinize people, society will automatically change. You help people raise up to a higher level. But Jesus did meditate. He did some form of yoga. Went to India. He learned some of these things, and brought it back to his people who were doing a really shitty religion. The religion of the Jewish religion and the Old Testament is just, the way that they think about God is really bad. Like it's not God. And I've talked about that in many videos, right? And so the Old Testament sucks. The religion itself sucks, to the extent that the religion is manipulating people to focus on shit that they've changed to make it seem like they have the only pathway to get to heaven, and you owe your money and your allegiance to them. And so, when a person says, I meditated and brought out darkness, again, there's lots of different ways of meditating, and there's lots of objects of meditation, and there's systems of meditation, and not all of them are going to produce good results. And, it also has to do, like I said, with what happens inside of you. But you can't characterize everything as, spirituality as something dark or negative. People talk about spiritualism and these other, Madame Blavatsky and these fucking people, right? And those are people who are looking for powers. Like there are people who want yogic powers. They want, they can do yogic practices to get powers and wealth and money. And again, that's trying to take something spiritual that really isn't, that's a power system. And so there's all these types of things out there. Kundalini yoga and these things, third eye yoga, the Ajna chakra, the one between your eyes, the pineal gland. And these are all power systems. You have to find a pure system, which is what the Sajmark system is, that is just about you connecting to God. It's not about making your life better. It's not about doing any of these types of things. It's not about getting powers or, being a celebrity, something, some kind of, money-making guru, none of these things. It's about connecting to the divinity within you. And there's a method and there's a system. And I don't give a shit if people try it. Like I said, there's lots of people who I would have hoped would try it, or they tried it and it didn't register with them, or, whatever it is. And that's, there's nothing I could say or do about it. You can't do it because I say so. You can't do it because, I vouch for it, or, you think I'm recommending it, which I'm not. I can tell you how well it worked for me. Like this person said, I'm fine with the person saying, the Bible, reading the Gospels work for them. I would have passed by that comment, said, whatever, great. Good for you. I don't care. It's just, it's not a threat to me that, the Bible's working for you. I'm not, trying to convert everybody, right? But when the person said, you have to listen to what Jesus said about himself and then refer to John, the shit that Jesus said about himself, you can't say shit like that, right? And how do you know he said that? Hopefully he didn't, but if he did, it's, it's a moment of egoism. It's not a spiritual saying. It's bragging, it's showing off, it's these things, which Jesus did do. Some of the miracles and some of the other things, he didn't have permission to do those things. These kind of the cities and powers come early on in yoga. There's various other yogic traditions. In Sajmarg, they're blocked. Like the powers are there, but you can't use them because people misuse them, like Jesus did. Like all the miracles Jesus did were more show-off miracles than anything else. They were just, look what I can do, right? And of course that's going to happen. When people don't have he didn't have a guru, he didn't have someone to oversee what he was doing. He was out there, battling the fucking Romans and the Pharisees and trying to win people over. And then, ultimately had, a spiritual fall because he's not, there was a lack of direction, right? He had some spiritual evolution, but there was no sense of a purpose and just all of it, in working with the people he's working with and the remedial nature of the religion. And so it's not a, spiritual success story. Towards the end, it's the whole stuff before the crucifixion, all the rest of it, there's a lot of egoism, there's a lot of fall, there's a lot of despair and depression because working with people sucks, especially when you're trying to impart spirituality to them. And then, the religion took off from there in a negative way, right? And so when the person says, go back and read the shit, I know what it says. Like, I've read, these sections, especially the stuff where Jesus talks about, I am that I am, and, this stuff with John 3:16. Here, I'm just, in one of those moods. It was the King James Version. It starts with 3. There was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. The same came to Jesus by night and said unto him, Rabbi, we know thou art a teacher come from God, for no man can do these miracles that thou doest, except be with God. In all these other traditions, there's miracles and there's powers and things. And if that's why you follow somebody, it's fucked. Because it's a low-level thing. Using your spiritual evolution, the early stages of spiritual evolution, to do miracles and change the outcome of things that shouldn't be changed. If God orders you to use some sort of powers to change something, like if there's divine consciousness that says, all right, these things have to change. And then you could, change the script, the plan, there's things that need to be adjusted. I mean, that's some of the roles of saints, right? But it's done in private without showing people any of these things. Because you don't want people focusing on these powers and, these cities, cities, SIDIHIS in India. You don't want people to gravitate to that when they should be working and focusing on God. Like if God gives you some powers to change something, like you have specific work, you come down, you incarnate as a human being, you have a plan to do specific work, you're given the powers to do that work. And, it's not like being a fucking superhero or, the majority of people can't understand what's going on. And they just see these powers and go, oh, wouldn't that be great? I'd make myself wealthy, I'd make myself king, all this kind of shit. You don't want people thinking that way, right? And so you would just have a thought and change things in a very private way, and nobody knows it would happen. I mean, there's spiritual saints that are doing work all the time, and they don't want people to know. They're not showing. Jesus had this, he wanted people to see him, right? Like he was performing. He wanted people, there was some, whatever it is, narcissism there, right? And to whatever extent this stuff has actually happened, because every religion makes up shit about how powerful their guy is so that people will do it. Because dumb people need stuff like that. They need power. They need magic tricks. They can't just feel God's love and have that be enough. They need some sort of, some material proof of the thing. The same came to Jesus by night and said unto him, Rabbi, we know that our teacher come from God, for no man can do these miracles that thou doest, except God with him. Jesus answered and said unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Nicodemus saith unto him, How can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter the second time in his mother's womb and be born? Jesus answered, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born of water and of the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of God. That which is born of flesh is flesh, and that which is born of spirit is spirit. Which that part would be, that you have to focus on your spiritual sense, because your physical body doesn't enter into the kingdom of God. And I'm not sure if that's what that's meant to say, but that stuff would be true. Marvel that not unto thee you must be born again. The wind bloweth where it listeth, and thou hearest the sound thereof, but canst not tell whence it cometh, and whither it goeth. So is every one that is born of the Spirit. Nicodemus answered and said unto him, How can these things be? Jesus answered and said unto him, Art thou a master of Israel, and knowest not these things? Verily, verily, life is but a dream. Verily, verily, I say unto thee, we speak that we do know, and testify that we have seen, and yea, receive not our witness. Yea is involved in this. If I've told you earthly things, and ye believe not, how shall ye believe if I tell you of heavenly things? And no man hath ascended up to heaven, but he that came down from heaven, ever the Son of Man, which is in heaven. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so the Son of Man be lifted up. Thou knowest, believeth in him, whoever believeth in him should not perish, but have eternal life. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. See, that's a fucked up thing to say, right? Because, like I said, everything is created from God. But why would God send his only Son? Like, if this was real, this is God has no mind. God doesn't. Everything is made of God. Like, everything's God's creation. It's one child, right? God has one child, and it's the earth, and it's the moon, it's the sun, it's the etheric universe, it's everything, right? Like, it's all one creation. Everything else is like cells in your body. Like, the earth is like a cell in God's body, right? God isn't in human form, but, this is the divine body is, these things are like sands. The sands on a beach are just little cells, little things in the overall scheme of the universe. And then there's the etheric universe that's even more vast. And so this is like silly shit, right? Why would God send, if you were God, would you send your kid out to this fucking world and sacrifice him for these fucking pieces of shit, right? It's just stupid. Like, the people are horrible people and based in their own choosing and, genetic manipulation and other things that happen here. There's lots of stuff going on beyond that where human beings are, set up for some level of failure because they didn't evolve naturally. But, this just a silly line here. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. He that believeth on him is not condemned, but he that believeth is not condemned already, because he hath not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. And so him saying this about himself is fucked, right? Like, you just can't say, that's like what crazy people talk about. You can't say shit like that, right? Like, people ask Babaji, the second master of the Sajmark system, was far more evolved than Jesus and had, a more capacity to help people change and help people become what he became. And somebody said, "What are you?" He said, "I am what I ought to be," which is a great answer, right? Like, he's not lying. But he's not bragging. How many people can say I am what I ought to be, right? So that's a very simple way of saying it. Not I'm the only Son of God, and if you worship me, I'll save you. You can't do shit, but I can lift you up because you're a worthless piece of shit, and only I can save you. And, it's like you can't say shit like that, right? It's egoism, and it's, and again, I don't know if he said this or they just manipulated what he said. I don't know. But there is an element of Jesus bragging throughout the Bible and some of the things that he says and showing off and needing for people to see him, right? If you have to convince people through miracles, those people suck. Like, they should be able to feel your divine essence, and you can say, you can have what I have. I can help you achieve what I have. You can raise up to the level that I'm here. That's what a true spiritual person would do, like a spiritual master. And this is a condemnation that light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. For everyone that doeth evil hath the light, neither cometh to the light, lest his deeds should be reproved. But that he doeth, truth cometh into the light, that has needs may be manifest, and they are wrought of God.
after these things came Jesus and his disciples into the land of Judea, and that he tarried with them and baptized. So that's enough of this shit. You know, like this is bad stuff. Like it's misleading, and someone can't die for your sins, which I've talked about. All these other things, right? But the important part here is, you know, the time to be with Jesus when Jesus was alive. Like that was Jesus at his, that was the peak of Christianity. And as soon as Jesus was gone, there was a slow erosion. First there was the people who knew him and could relate all the greatness that he, all the great, the spiritual stuff that he had, his teachings, what it was like to be around him, his energy, right? Like this is any saint. It's the same for any saint, any spiritual person. And then there's people who could maybe experience, like if you were sitting with Jesus and you could feel his essence, any of these spiritual people, and Jesus was not the most evolved. Jesus was on the first rung of spirituality, point two, the first step towards spiritual evolution, right? And so, which is great. It's still a lot more than the normal person, but he still had a long way to go. But being around people like that, and you feel their energy, and you get in touch with their consciousness, and you're able to hear their ideas, and where they're. I mean, there's a different level of spiritual evolution there, and you can, like, through osmosis, they kind of you get a sense of it. You get like lifted up when you're around them, and you're where they are. You become evolved up to the point that they are for that brief period of time, and you get a taste what it's like to have that kind of spiritual evolution. And those people that got to spend time with them and experience that, they can sort of still impart that stuff for a little bit after he dies. But when they die, and there's no one who ever knew Jesus, the essence is more or less lost. And he wasn't able to leave his essence with his chief disciple, Peter. He wasn't able to transmit his condition to Peter. And so Christianity became what it became. And so the time to be around and meditate with Jesus and benefit from his spiritual evolution. And again, he didn't have a method to help people impart spiritual training. He didn't have some spiritual method. And he didn't, talk about so much, in a specific way, where he got this information from and the method he used, which is some form of yoga that when he went to India. So all that there is now is a book. Being around the essence of Jesus was so much different, but how did that work out? Right? Like the book is something that, can reach the dumbasses, the dumb fucks, like the remedial people, the people without abstract thought. Every religion dumbs itself down so they can get as many, easily influenced people who are superstitious and who are fearful and want some answers and want to know that they'll be taken care of when they die, whatever it is, right? And they sell them a load of shit and make a bunch of false promises. But the time to be around it is when the person was alive. But how did it work out for Jesus when he was alive? His disciples turned on him. His followers turned on him. The Jewish Pharisees turned on him. The Romans turned on him. And he died miserable and alone. Father, why hast thou forsaken me? And so it's because people don't want the higher. They don't want what Jesus had to offer. They want some imaginary, your own personal Jesus. Whatever you want and need from somebody, make Jesus into that. A spiritual person, because he can't be who he is. So you can just say, oh, this is what Jesus was like. Well, how the fuck did you know? Were you there 2,000 years ago? Maybe in a previous life. But you don't know, right? Because, you'd be seeking that now in the form of a living person. Some living dynamic system, right? Which Saj Marg is for some period of time, a masterless system at this point, the Gratefullness meditation. But, doing spiritual, true spiritual system is just on a whole different level. And why would I fucking go back to some book that's riddled with lies and manipulations and bullshit, right? Connecting to the divinity within you is just higher than doing a religion. And people who could do only a religion, sure, do a religion. But you don't need to be here. There's plenty of fucking channels and shit for you. There's plenty of shit that's remedial. And if you're seeing that there's higher level shit here, but you still are connected to, some part of the dumbed down system, and you want me to regress and go backwards, like why the fuck is that a good thing, right? you're saying that I don't have good judgment, that somehow the shit that I'm doing now, the stuff I'm doing with Saj Marg and the meditation is in darkness, and that you because you experience meditation in darkness, and you think that we have the same experiences, which we don't, and that we're doing the same thing, which we weren't, right? And that somehow I should go back and read some shitty fucking this John 3:16, which is the most evil thing in the fucking Bible. It's this idea that everyone is going to hell outside of the Christianity, so it gave the Christians the right to, in their minds, justification to go fucking kill people and enslave them, because in the guise that you're saving them from eternal damnation, because they have to accept Jesus or they're going to hell, which is complete bullshit. That's a fucking lie, and I want no part of that shit here. You can run that shit where on your channel and all these people that write John 3:16, but it's a fucking evil lie that's caused so much damage, and it's hurting the people that believe in it. And it's hurting the people that were enslaved and indoctrinated and conquered by these so-called Christian missionaries and the armies that they went out with these fucking crusades and all this other bullshit. Because Christianity is a very remedial religion. The Bible is a remedial book. There's some good stuff in it, and it's not. But it's just this. It's not great. It's not. It's of a lower level, and that's why there's so much violence and blood and a focus on the crucifixion, which was not a. It's a horrible thing. The crucifixion of Jesus was a horrible thing. It wasn't him dying for your sins. It was a bunch of fucking shitty people that didn't want a higher developed soul around who would wreck their fucking, their games and their thing. And Jesus was already done because his disciples were already fucking betraying him. He just wanted out, right? He was just like, get me the fuck out of here, because, that's what happens to spiritual people. They just, they get worn down and they fucking, they're like, get the fuck out. God, just help me. I can't be here anymore, right? Because, they're almost every spiritual movement fails because people don't want the higher. They want the lower. And this person wants me to go back into the lower when when I've benefited so much from the higher. Okay, so, I don't know what to do. I was going to do something. Let me see if I'm going to go cook some potatoes. I make these French fries and things, and I'm going to see if my energy's just I got wiped out by the whole fire and things. Let's see if I can wrap this one up in a bit. Okay, so this has been a really weird day. I want to get this video done for tomorrow. It's 8 o'clock at night. I just got so wiped out today. Everything was just a weird day. So let me start with this part here that I can put in the Journey series, and then I'll go talk about that stupid TV show last. But I just want to add to what I was saying earlier. So the two comments that the people left that I read, there are spiritual movements. There are movements, not necessarily spiritual. There are dynamic movements that happen. There's people who are innovators, what they call disruptors, all this stuff. And there's people that are just ahead of their time. Or they get an idea, and I don't want to say people ahead of their time. There are ideas out there that are floating around, inventions, trends, any number of things. Some of them are they don't benefit humanity, but they're things that are going to overtake humanity in one way or another. People who are visionaries that see where the thing is going, and they're ahead of their time. The pockets of the future. This idea that I had, that came to me through the spiritual, practice that I do. This idea that we're going to need pockets of the future. People starting to figure out how they're going to survive, or what they're going to the changes they're going to have to undergo to survive in a post-apocalyptic type of situation, right? Which now looks kind of ingenious because, it's going to look more, the longer it goes, the more better this is going to look, right? Because it's right. It's a right thing. It was a good idea that it came through me. And, a number of these things. And so many things that I said, and the homesteading, and things that, me and my family did, things that I did, and, I have a visionary type personality. And to have a visionary type personality, the best part of it, the main thing that you need is the capacity to allow a connection to divinity. Nikola Tesla channeled his inventions. Like all these famous scientists, all these people who wrote epic books and things, they had a connection to some sort of divinity, right? I talked about that Elizabeth, whatever her name is. She wrote Eat, Pray, Love. She has an epic TED talk about this. Having this idea of a genius. Like a genius was like a channeled spirit that would come in, and someone had a genius. They weren't a genius. They had a genius, right? And so if you're not connected to divinity or some higher developed souls, in some cases lower developed souls, but something that sees from a different plane of existence, then you don't come up with shit. You can't be a visionary. And so there are a lot of people who are there late to the party. After everybody does something, after everybody gets into something, after everybody accepts something, they start joining in then. But there are people who are way out in front, and they're always like laughed at or whatever it is, right? Mocked, Noah's Ark, right? Shit like that. They're always, I mean, what happened to Jesus and all that. Spiritually, there's, spirit people are spiritual or whatever they might be. When I was self-publishing a book, there was a guy who had published hundreds of books, like what he did, and he even published books about publishing books, right? And I read one of them, and he talked about all the things you needed, and there was two choices for self-publishing. There's a company called Lightning Source that was the traditional self-publishing company, and then Amazon was created this thing called Create Space. I don't know if it's the same name now. And Create Space was, sort of a knockoff of Lightning Source. It was, different, but it was the same idea. And Amazon offered Amazon. The Create Space offered Amazon. You would have your own store in Amazon, and you would make most of the profit, like from the books you sold through your own store. Like if my book, it was like I would make $9. I don't know, one of the books I'd make $9 if I sold it through my own store on Amazon. And if I sold it on Amazon myself, on Amazon, if Amazon sold it through their, if someone found it through searching through Amazon, it was like $5, right? And so, Create Space Lightning Source couldn't offer something like that, right? And so even though Lightning Source was better in terms of years and years of self-publishing, and they were more professional, and Create Space was just figuring this out, Amazon was just figuring it out, everybody was using Amazon because Amazon was starting to grow. This is back in 2012, 13 is when I was publishing these books. And this guy had a great line. He said, I love a Lightning Source, and I publish so many books through Lightning Source, but it's obvious that Amazon is the way of the future. It just offers too many different things that are advantage that Create Space, that Lightning Source doesn't have, right? And so he said, you might love Lightning Source, but you're fighting a battle that was lost in 2009. And I thought that was a great line, right? You're fighting a battle that was already lost. You're engaged in something that's already been decided. Like Lightning Source is going to fade away into, almost nothing, and Amazon's going to grow, and everyone's going to publish their self-published shit through Amazon. Because it was just, it was like MySpace versus Facebook. It's like what AI is doing now. And so you can't be a visionary about everything. Like if you're a visionary, it's usually some specific thing that you can see things that are going to happen. And, part of whatever I offer here is not just in terms of me having a visionary personality and the divinity, what divinity allows me to see, right? But it's also what I get from the teachings of Sajmarg and these other things, the prophecies and all this other stuff that it's been proven to me in ways that for other people it hasn't. I was talking about that guy that I call the dodgy truther, and he hates Whispers of the Bright World. And we talked about it when we went back and forth about it, and I don't give a shit, right? Like, I don't care what difference does it make if he doesn't like it or anybody. I don't give a shit about any of this stuff. It's, people are going to make their own choices. I just simply put out the information, like I said, and if it resonates with them, that's great, but if it doesn't, that's fine too, because it has nothing to do with me. Like, my role is, yeah, I know about this stuff, and this may happen, and this is, or this is what I see, or this is what I know from the teachings, this is all the things I know. This is, me saying if any of this stuff is valid, which, each person has to determine for themselves, then it's something you might want to take a look at. It's up to you. My role ends when I produce this information, right? But this stuff with the Whispers of the Brighter World, I went through this thing where I was like, I know this crisis, a really difficult thing I went through. And I was sick, and I had to fast. It was brutal. And it was a whole thing that was happening. And I was, basically weak and in bed, and I was reading one of the Whispers books, and it just penetrated to a different level. Like, it took me to a different place. Like again, I wasn't using drugs or anything. This is just me fasting. And I was seeing things and understanding things, and, on my level of consciousness raised up to a higher level because I was, I was physical. I was almost out of my body, right? I was like, oh my God, these books are so much more. And I already love the books as it is, right? The messages. And, some of the mundane, ordinary messages had all this profound, like hidden subtext and things. And I was like, oh my God, this stuff is unreal. And then I talked to this guy, Rob, who's a preceptor, and he got into Whispers. And they used to sit around and read Whispers for 8 hours. And they were, him and other people, and they were having these same experiences, like the same kind of thing. And, those people who didn't have those experiences, for them, it isn't going to be anything, right? So I don't give a shit. Like, it's just, I was lucky enough to have it. And I would hope that other people would, have all the blessings I have. I'm not like, trying to withhold anything, but, people just don't rise up to it, right? They don't, they block it in one way or another. They're not ready or whatever it is, right? And so, the book of John in the Bible is so much below that, like it's on a level of consciousness. Like, there's stuff in there, but the stuff that Jesus supposedly says about himself and this thing about him being this guy and all that shit, that's bullshit. That's not real. There's no, and you're trying to grab onto something that fucking died 2,000 years ago. Like this fucking, it's been dead for 2,000 years. Like Jesus has left the fucking building. Like he's not even into he's disconnected from the religions, the organized religion. His spirit isn't there. He's not into it. Like if you individually connect with Jesus because of your love and devotion, yeah, that's great. It's amazing. Good for you. That's a wonderful thing. But there's still more you can do. That isn't the end all. But like that's, he's there. He'll connect with you. Like any soul will. I had a dream with Jesus in it, right? I talked about that. I had this dream in the Sajmark system when you have a dream of a master, and Jesus is part of the Sajmark meditation. Like this person who's saying, you should go back and read John fucking book or whatever. I've had experience of Jesus within the Sajmark confines and Sajmark system. He connected with Babaji when Babaji was master of the system. They had this dialogue and conversations and things. And so Jesus was sitting there, and I approached him, and I said to him, there was this thing where Babaji had asked Jesus if he, this Christians were coming to him, what did he want what did Jesus want Babaji to do about it? He said, yeah, please train them. This is great what you're doing. I want them to get your training, right? I mean, again, I'm not trying to sell this. This is by what I believe and my understanding. So I had this dream, and I wasn't thinking about this. I wasn't worried about it. I was concerned because Lalaji, the second master, said, you shouldn't shit on people's religion because sometimes it's all they can do. And so I had a hard time criticizing anything because there are people that weren't, maybe listening to me that couldn't become spiritual, that religion is all they could do. But at some point I realized that I had to just say what I know. And this dream was part of it. So this is like back in 2017. And I see Jesus and I go up to him, and I was like, these people are coming, these Christians are coming to my channel, and I'm talking about these things. And, are you cool with that or whatever it was, right? He's like, yeah, why do you think I'm sending them to you, right? Like he was saying to me, he was sending Christians to hear about, the truth about his religion and his life and these things, right? Or at least a more, something that was more truthful than they were getting from the bullshit religion. And, these spiritual movements, religious movements, they've been failures one after another. And there's a common denominator, and that's people don't fucking want to change, and they don't want to embrace it. And they wait till the thing's been dumbed down and all the good stuff is sucked out of it. And then they'll gravitate to some bullshit version that promises some bullshit heaven, and some of these other things that can't be delivered upon, that nobody with like any common sense would believe in, and they get indoctrinated in it, and they can't leave it because they're worried that if they leave it, they're going to hell, and they got their claws into them, and that's not my problem. There's plenty of places for those people to go. It's not this is not what I do here. Like I don't, there's something more that if you can't rise up to it, that's not my fucking problem. But don't expect me to dumb it down for your remedial ass, right? So, anyways, let me wrap this part up here. Then I'll come back and do the review of the Queen's Gambit. Okay, so this actually ties into all this stuff. The stuff with the show called the Queen's Gambit. I knew about this show. It just looked stupid. I thought it was going to be feminist. I didn't see the trailer, and I could just tell. It stars that whatever actress. I think she's a British actress, and she looks like an alien. My wife and I were talking about how like she doesn't look like a human. Just really weird, dark eyes. Like she has like eyes that don't have pupils, right? And she was in that movie called Split. M. Night Shyamalan's movie about that was the whole Year of the Beast thing. There's a character named the Beast, and the Beast character, this dude that had a split personality, and he wouldn't kill her. She was like a teenage girl. She killed her friends, but because she cut herself and she was broken like him, right? And it was also the Year of the Broken came after. There's the Year of the Broken and the Year of the Beast, and some of those things were about that. Whatever. There was this kind of movement to celebrate brokenness, right? And, I didn't understand why her star kind of took off because she looks so weird. Not that she looks ugly. She looks inhuman. Like, it's like, it's one thing if you're going to say, all right, we're not going to cast people who have traditional movie star looks. That would be fine with me, right? Because these fake, plastic surgery, whatever it is, men and women who just don't, all this hair and makeup and all this stuff to make them look like something like a Ken doll and a Barbie. I would like to see that go. But she looks like an alien. She doesn't look like a human. And she was in this movie called The Gorge. And I don't know how I heard some interview about it. I saw the movie. It's on Apple TV. And she had talked about how everybody came up to her because this Queen's Gambit was some kind of mega hit. And my wife had watched it. I thought she had watched the whole show, and I thought it was a movie at first. And she talked about how it was good, or maybe somebody told her it was good, or she heard it was good on like Reddit or something like that. And so I was watching some stuff, whatever it was, and it all sucked. Like it was just I watched a bunch of like dumb. There's just these shows that you can tell immediately they're for dumb fucks, right? They're just the same stuff that's in WWF. It's just like so stupid, like Entertainment Tonight bullshit, and like it's not for intelligent people. Like people who watch sophisticated movies with sophisticated storylines, and they can't understand shit. Like they're always asking questions, and they don't, they can't follow the plot or the characters, and so they make this TV for these dumb fucks, and there's an ever growing population of dumb fucks, and it's like sad because it's not like I'm some rocket scientist, but there's just this dumb fuck TV, and it's become more prevalent. And so I was watching all these things, and I'm like, I'll take a look at this thing, The Queen's Gambit. But I went in thinking that my wife had watched a little bit and liked it, and, which wasn't the case. Like she remembered watching a little bit. She wasn't even sure. And, I had this idea that was a true story, which it wasn't. And so it's about this girl who's good at chess. And it starts off like it's got good production value. So I think it's going to be quality. And I'm thinking it's a true story. And her mom dies, like her mom's a piece of shit drunk and psychotic and some shit like that. She ends up in a fucking orphanage. And there's a woman, like a nun there, these women who are running the orphanage is a Christian orphanage. And it's clearly a transgender person. But the person doesn't talk all that much. And I'm like, wow, why would there be a transgender? It's set in the fucking Kentucky in like 1960. Like the 50s and the 60s, right? So it's the 1950s, and like it covers a decade, somewhere in the mid 1950s or something. And they have a transgender actress in this role, right? And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, is that? And I'm like, maybe it's just a one with a deep voice. I mean, it's clearly, And then it starts off before that. It starts off with her. Uh, she's in a hotel room and she's drunk and whatever, inebriated, and that someone is banging on the door because she's supposed to play chess against some Russian, fucking the number one player in the world. They don't tell you this, but you kind of figure it out as the story goes on. And I'll come back to that. So, and I'm watching the thing, and she's in this this orphanage, and they're giving her a fucking tranquilizer, and she gets addicted to these tranquilizers. She's like 8 or 9 years old, and she learns how to play chess, and she takes a number of the tranquilizers. She stores them up, and when she takes a tranquilizer, she can sit in her bed and visualize the chessboard and play chess in her mind, and it becomes this habitual thing. Was when the government steps in and says, "Hey, you guys can't tranquilize these fucking kids anymore," and she breaks into the office and takes like a handful of the fucking thing, and almost ODs and passes out. And it comes back, and she's a teenager, and she gets adopted, and the husband of the adopted husband's a piece of shit, and the mom is like an alcoholic, depressed person who's also on these tranquilizers, who gets dumped by her fucking husband. He abandons her and her new adopted daughter. She's like fucking 13, 14 years old now. And she goes to high school, and the other girls are all stupid. And, like there's a moment when she was a little kid and she's playing chess with this janitor who teaches her all these, he's like an expert at chess, and he teaches her all this bullshit, this chess bullshit, right? And this guy comes in who runs a chess club for high school, and she comes in and mops the floor with all of his students. And he gives her a doll, and she takes the doll and drops it in the trash, right? Because she's against the fucking, this is feminist bullshit, right? And it's, somewhere in this thing, I'm like, this isn't a fucking true story, right? Like, this just didn't happen. Because there's too much, and if it was, they'd have manipulated it to fit this agenda. But then it's clear that I search it, it's not based in a true story at all. And I'm like, oh, this thing fucking is, this is not right. And, the first couple episodes are a little bit better. But it's just saturated with this fucking woke bullshit, feminist stuff. And then I'm like, all right, now I'm going to have to watch it because I need to slam it, because I find out it won fucking 11 Emmys. And it's a really poorly made film. It's obviously based in the Bobby Fischer story. Well, here's the other thing. I realize that I know a little bit more than the average person about chess. And I know about Bobby Fischer, and I read Bobby Fischer's fucking biography, whatever it is. They made it into a great movie called The Pawn Sacrifice. And there was the Searching for Bobby Fischer, which was based in a true story as well. The kid who it's based on was a real person. But there was no woman who came in and started cleaning the floor with men, became a grand master, and then was taking on the Russians. That was Bobby Fischer in that story. And Bobby Fischer had mental problems. And this girl was an addict. Her mom, her adoptive mom, was also taking tranquilizers. Her original mom was obviously an alcoholic, and her adoptive mom was also an alcoholic, and she was taking tranquilizers, and she'd send her daughter to the store, and the daughter was bringing back half a bottle, and she was using these tranquilizers to enhance her chess ability, like someone would use steroids. She was basically cheating, using this to manipulate her mind, and of course that never fucking works, right? I mean, there are things that can enhance your brain power, the Joe Biden talkie pills or whatever. There's things that can, give you limited, either pharmaceutical drugs or things like ginkgo and, herbs and things. But there's no, tranquilizers aren't going to help you play chess. It's going to make you sleepy and fucking dull, and you need to have an alert mind. But they're just they're making this bullshit story, right? So she starts winning all these chess tournaments and like big time test tournaments and making money. And her mom, all of a sudden, her adoptive mom, steps out of her depressed, victimized housewife and manages her. And she's getting drunk, and she's using these pills, and she's has physical issues, and she hooks up with some guy in Mexico, and that she was pen paling with or some bullshit, and he dumps her, and it's this all fucking sad sack story. But she's helping her daughter, and she's managing her, and She's contributing to this, this thing that she's doing. And before that, I want to get it to come back to that part. But she, when she went to her first chess tournament, there's a guy there that she kind of likes, the girl. And she's like 16. He's like a grown ass man. And they meet later after she's an accomplished chess player. And he invites her up to the room and he's going to bang her. And, she's like, hasn't been with a man before. And his fucking boyfriend walks in. And I'm like, what the fuck? And, like, this is, again, they're both from Kentucky and this is the fucking 50s. And he's got a boyfriend. And like, and they kind of, it's subtle, but, and I'm like, this is for kids? Like, they're talking about this being a good movie for young women, which we'll get back to that too with the whole fucking 11 Emmys. And so, and then she asks, like, how, tell Dan I said hi or whatever. And it's weird as fuck, right? It's a weird fucking scene. And, she has some relationship with these guys and none of them are good enough for her. Like, they all suck. And, just shitting on guys left and right. And she's kicking their ass in chess and she's so much better than they, and they're all a fucking piece of shit. Right? Like, all this stuff. And so then her mom dies and she contacts her stepdad and he says, well, you can have the house. You just have to finish making the payments and you take care of the burial. And you knew he was going to fucking back out on it because this is about how shitty men are. And then he shows up at the house with the lawyer saying he's changed his mind. Or he said he never said it. And that he wants her out of the house and he's his house. And he's got equity in it. Like, it's just all these ways that men suck and they're all pieces of shit. And he starts ragging on his ex-wife and who was a drunk and depressed. And he's a piece of shit too. And, well, I mean, they make him into a piece of shit in terms of the character. She says, no, she was just bored and limited. This whole thing, like being a housewife and not having a job and not being able to do all these other things. She played the piano and not being able to express herself made her into a drunk and a fucking, because being a housewife is like the worst fucking thing ever. And, like all these women in the 50s and 60s were miserable because they weren't being able to fucking spread their wings. Although, doing a housewife's job, like doing it well, it's like, it would be like $160,000 job in modern day fucking, employment. I mean, it's a hard job to do, being a housewife and all these things, especially back then when they actually did shit, right? So, she beats everybody, but she's got to play the Russians, and it's taken fresh out of Bobby Fischer's story. And now she's going to France, and like that's where she was in the opening scene. And she's in New York with this guy, used to be the champ till she crushed him or whatever. And this French girl shows up. And I'm like, oh my God, she's going to, that lump of a, when she's drunk in the hotel room and the guy's pounding on her door to come play the Russian guy in the opening scene, there's somebody under the covers. And I'm like, I wonder if that's going to be a woman. I thought that when the first scene, but I'm like, this is a true story. So, I'm like, I don't think it, maybe, whatever. But now I'm like, oh, she's going to sleep with this French girl. And of course she ends up going to France and the girl is there and they meet up. And it looks like they're going to hook up with some guys, but it's not going to happen. And they have the very same scene, but this time they pan over to the lump of, this person, this drunk fuck's sleeping in the bed, and you see that it's a girl, and she's having she had this, one night stand with a girl, because of course she did. She has to be fucking on the spectrum too. She has to be, some kind of, whatever, pansexual or whatever the fuck it is, right? Because why wouldn't she be? And I'm like, this is just such an unrealistic story for the 1950s and 60s, right? And she goes down, she loses to the Russian guy. And she's like fucked up, she's all on drugs. And, then her mom dies, all those kind of things happen. And she's like kind of falling apart a little bit. And then everyone sort of rallies around her. And now I'm just fast forwarding through it. Like I stop when it looks like a pivotal scene. It's just gone full drama and full woke. And I'm like, they're saying that this girl is an alcoholic and a drug addict and using drugs to enhance her chess abilities. And she's like kind of a moral degenerate and, I'm just a remedial person, is somehow a good example for young women, right? And that, a bunch of young women started playing chess just like they started archery after Katniss fucking Everdeen from the Hunger Games. And I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ, right? Because it isn't based in a real person. And they, like I said, they steal most of the story. The framework of the story is based in Bobby Fischer. because all the things that she accomplished, Bobby Fischer actually fucking did. And Bobby Fischer was a crazy fuck. He was Jewish, and he became really anti-Semitic, and he got into this conspiracy theory bullshit. That was like, some of it was like right-wing, QB type stuff. And he hated Jews. He blamed Jews for everything. And he was like, people were like, but Bobby, you're Jewish, right? And he was paranoid and, mentally ill, but he used to crush motherfuckers. There's a guy, I did a whole report on him. There was this, when I was taking my master's in counseling, I had assignment. It was creativity and madness. How many geniuses are also often crazy people. And one of my friends from Saj Marg was a really accomplished chess player, and he said, "Oh, you got to do Bobby Fischer." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Bobby Fischer was the ultimate." And he told me this book. I went and bought the book, and I read it in like 2 days. It was amazing. It was the movie The Pawn Sacrifice based on it. And like, he played this guy who was a grand master, which is a hard fucking thing. You have to be like these geniuses, mathematical and just in terms of memorization and pattern recognition. These people become grand masters, excellent chess players, very competitive, right? Amongst these intellectual people who are big on being intellectual. And he crushed this fucking guy so bad the guy had a nervous fucking breakdown. Like, people would sit across from him and he was like seething with competitiveness. Like, he was more competitive than Michael Jordan, right? He was this, and just crazy as fuck, like doing crazy shit and just all over the place. But they ripped off the story, and then I go back and I go, I bet that was a transgender actress, right? And so I look it up, and in that role, this is a woman who's, the character is a woman who is teaching the young orphan girls to sing, in charge of the choir. It's obviously a fucking biological male. And I'm like, what the fuck, right? And they show this person again towards the end of the movie when she goes back and visits the orphanage. And I'm like, they stuck a biological male in there to play a female part. Like, this is a part for a female, and it's not a transgender character. This person is not transgender in the story. This person is female. This is a biologically female woman who's teaching at a Christian school where they wouldn't have a guy dressed up like a woman doing that, right? So this is a biological male who's playing this character. And I'm like, this biological male is taking a job from a woman, a woman actress, but they're celebrating this as somehow kind of a good thing. I've said this before, that transgender men winning. I hope the first female president is transgender man. Like, that would be the greatest thing ever. Like, just let it happen, right? Because feminist women are losing out. This is what J.K. Rowling is so upset about and getting crucified for, because she says all these biological men are taking our good shit, right? Like, we've worked so hard to get these jobs and these roles and they're women. There are biological women like Caitlyn Jenner biological men winning the Woman of the Year prizes, and like, women are getting screwed over. But this is supposed to be some feminist masterpiece. It's all over the place. And so what they did is take a bunch of men suck, a bunch of woke bullshit, and throw all these fucking characters in there, and then take Bobby Fischer's story, and then make this into some kind of a feminist anthem, and give it 11 fucking Emmys, right? And I was like, oh my God. Of course, this was from about 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know when the thing came out, but from, it was like over a year old. And, it was this monster hit. And it was like, holy shit, right? This is a horrible movie. It's not just that it's horrible because of the new age woke shit, feminist bullshit, which is always tough to watch because it just wrecks the plot. It wrecks the storyline. It's not and then they cast this girl, looks like a fucking alien who doesn't have fucking pupils, right? All those things. It's hard to tell if she's a good actress or not because, like, she has that very annoying voice. There's another actress, the woman who played I think the movie was called The Fifth Element, and she has the same kind of voice. There's a very specific voice, and it's, maybe slightly dudeish, masculine a little bit, but just, it's got a tone, it's got a high pitch to it. It's very hard to listen to, right? And it's got a horrible plot, and the thing is just falls apart on every level, and there's just nothing there. But like, because of its political fucking ramifications, and this, they say empowering this young girl who's, she's she's basically like a chess player on steroids who needs fucking, these types of medications to enhance her chess ability. And just, I mean, there's nothing there. There's nothing noble about her characters. There's no redeeming qualities about her story, right? Just a lot of like crazy women who are somehow broken and still, manage to fucking do something spectacular, right? Only because it's scripted that way. And this is kind of tying into what I said earlier about, people just jump on the bandwagon and not, don't know what's good or bad. I mean, this is obvious for most people in the truth community. And people who are on the right wing can look at something like this and go, oh, well, that's a piece of shit because it's pushing the woke agenda. But there's so much bullshit people on the right wing fall for, all the Trump bullshit and all the lies, People just wanting to be told that their fucked up belief system is valid, and it's not. You've been fucked up by America. You've been indoctrinated your whole life, and you've been separated into these two fucked up, right wing, left wing paradigm, the left wing and the right wing, that are both unnatural and fucked up, right? Or just completely messed up, and all of the above. And so, like, it's just this is what I'm talking about, like the visionary stuff or whatever. Like when people are exposed to real stuff, it's only a matter of time before you're going to gravitate to stuff that you've kind of always suspected. And it's not stuff that you're into. But as soon as the indoctrination that you're still into, whether it be your fucking religion or be some Trump bullshit, right-wing bullshit, or left-wing veganism or something like that, as soon as, you hear something about your shit, you're going to turn on the person, and that, I've experienced that over and over again because, people just don't want the fucking truth. Anyways, let me wrap this one up here. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paravato definitely pointing for the apocalypse. And the ascension, everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.